the physics of a creative cosmos. The following is an essay on what's called the creative cosmos, as it's seen through the eyes of the physicist and writer Paul Davies. The notion of a creative cosmos goes back over 3,000 years. Davies himself attempts to give it a justification via physics and scientific, that is, physical cosmology, particularly, in this essay at least, in terms of stochasticity, randomness within rules, and quantum mechanics. There is no doubt at all that Paul Davies is religious. He's just not a Christian, Muslim, or Jew. To use Davies's own words, the God he believes in doesn't bear much relation to the personal God of religion, still less to the God of the Bible or the Quran. Davies's creative cosmos clashes with classical theology in that his God isn't omnipotent, he's persuasive. Davies's God didn't create the universe and all its laws ex nihilo. Instead, he shapes eternal matter, and the laws emerge. In addition, Davies's God isn't transcendent and static. He's relational and changeable. Davies believes in what he calls a creative cosmos. Indeed, he says that he's committed to the notion. As for the precise words creative cosmos, Davies will have drawn inspiration from the early 20th century philosopher Alfred North Whitehead's concept of a creative advance into novelty. This, in turn, has been connected to the Hindu goddess Shakti, who is deemed to be the creative power of nature, Prakriti. In physics speak, she's the embodiment of energy. All these aspects of Davies's God and cosmology are given expression in the physics which he concentrates upon. What role does God play in Davies's scheme? Davies on a necessary being and brute facts. Davies tells his readers that in his own mind, I have no doubts at all that the arguments for a necessary world are far shakier than the arguments for a necessary being, so my personal inclination is to opt for the latter. At this juncture, Davies doesn't tell us why a necessary being wins out here. The notion of a necessary being is a huge historical and philosophical subject which can't be tackled here. In any case, Davies would argue that the arguments for a necessary world are equally complex, if not as historical in nature. Davies also tells his readers that he has no doubts at all as to the rationality of nature. I am also committed to the notion of a creative cosmos. Davies's very use of the word rational gives the game away. Isn't it at least possible that the world is neither rational nor irrational, except to human minds? That said, if one does believe that the world is rational, then one must also believe that it could have been, or actually is, irrational or absurd. What about Davies's rejection of brute facts, at least in these respects? Here's the thing. If we don't accept the existence and features of the world as brute facts that could have been otherwise, then what if the features were or had been otherwise? Wouldn't these alternative possible features face the same questions? In other words, wouldn't they need to be taken to be brute facts too? Alternatively, wouldn't they need to be explained? Davies may assume that alternative features could be explained, or that they are self-explainers. If they could be explained, then why would that be? Bear in mind here that, according to Davies, the actual features of universe can't be, or haven't been, explained. How does Davies get out of this bind? The problem with brute facts is that some are rejected by scientists and philosophers, yet others are embraced by the very same people. For example, take the philosopher David Chalmers. He accepts brute facts in various areas of science, philosophy and logic, but not when it comes to consciousness. Chalmers tells us that physics does not tell us why there is matter in the first place. Consequently, it may not be able to tell us why many properties in physics have their nature. Such things are deemed to be, to use Chalmers's preferred term, primitive. In other words, they can't be deduced from more basic principles. Davies may say here that physics doesn't answer these questions, but religion and philosophy can. Indeed, perhaps Chalmers will agree with him. After all, Chalmers says that physics does not tell us various things. Thus, in physics, they're taken as brute. Davies on stochasticity. Through physics alone, how do we arrive at Davies's creative cosmos? Davies does so through what he calls stochastic systems and quantum mechanics. Indeed, stochastics can be tied to quantum mechanics, as Davies does in the following. A stochastic system is, roughly speaking, one which is subject to unpredictable and random fluctuations. In modern physics, stochasticity enters in a fundamental way in quantum mechanics. It is also inevitably present when we deal with open systems, subject to chaotic external perturbations. In Davies's scheme, we enter a grey area between deterministic laws and what he calls laws of organization. What explains the nature of this grey area? To Davies, stochasticity does. He refers to stochasticity as an efficient device through which divine intentions can be carried out. It's odd to call stochasticity a device, let alone a device which the divine somehow uses or employs. What's important to Davies is that all this leads to a situation in which there is no need for such a God to interfere directly with the course of evolution of the universe by loading the dice. Here again, Davies is arguing against the God of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, a God who does interfere directly with the course of the evolution of the universe by loading the dice. Indeed, Davies mentions Albert Einstein's famous statement, "God does not play dice in the universe here." Unlike Einstein, Davies does want his God to play dice. There's a problem with relying on stochastics when it comes to defending the existence of a creative cosmos. How can any process be both creative and stochastic if the latter notion implies what Davies himself calls anarchy? The answer is that Davies believes that there is a difference between stochasticity and anarchy. Davies goes into detail about his creative, not anarchistic, cosmos in the following passage. The development of new forms and systems is subject to general principles of organization that guide and encourage rather than compel matter and energy to develop along certain predetermined pathways of evolution. This is a problematic passage, and it is so for many reasons. Firstly, it's odd that elsewhere Davies is keen to point out that the word law in physics is taken from Christian theology. He also tells us that most scientists forget this. Yet here Davies tells us about general principles of organization that guide and encourage rather than compel. This position is no less God-centered or anthropomorphic. It doesn't stop being so simply because these general principles of organization guide rather than enforce, encourage rather than demand. And that's in spite of working out what exactly the words guide and encourage mean in terms of physics. Here we have an old problem when it comes to possible metaphors. Are the words guide and encourage, process theologians have used the word persuade, meant to be read metaphorically or literally? Taking them metaphorically is fine, it's just that we need to be clear that they are metaphors. And even if they are metaphors, we still need to work out why Davies uses these precise words. In any case, if X merely guides Y, then surely Y can, metaphorically, ignore or go against X. Similarly, if X merely encourages Y, then Y can ignore or go against that encouragement. Perhaps Davies allows all this in his creative cosmos. Davies on predestination versus determinism. Whatever the case is, it's clear that Davies is arguing against determinism and arguing for what he calls predestination. Now, predestination is a controversial term. What does Davies mean by it? He writes, "In the cosmic blueprint, I used the word predestination to refer to general tendencies, to distinguish it from determinism, which is the sense in which Aquinas uses the term. For those, such as process theologians, who choose to see God's guiding hand rather than genuine spontaneity in the way the universe develops creatively, then stochasticity can be regarded as an efficient device through which divine intentions can be carried out. And there is no need for such a God to interfere directly with the course of evolution by loading the dice. Guidance can be through the timeless laws of organization and information flow. From the word predestination to the rejection of determinism and the words God's guiding hand, this entire passage is infused with theology. Clearly, only allowing God a guiding hand is still an acceptance of the importance of God within this scheme. What's more, if God merely guides, then surely he can do much more than guide, if he decided to. Davies places limits on God through the physics of the creative cosmos. But is such a limited God actually God, with a capital G, at all? Moreover, what's to stop Davies incorporating many gods into his scheme, as in Hinduism and other religions? As for general tendencies, rather than fixed deterministic laws, what do these two words refer to? To the laws of organization and information flow, which Davies refers to at the end of the paragraph. Why aren't these laws just as fixed and deterministic as the other laws of physics? In fact, Davies argues that they are fixed, if not deterministic. Whatever the status of these laws of organization is, they place limits on any genuine spontaneity from happening in the cosmos, yet they're still laws. Laws which suggest God's guiding hand. Davies on old laws and new laws. Here we move from the limitations Davies places on physical law to his stress on new laws. For example, he writes, "The condition of total disorder, or randomness, the fairness of the quantum dice, is itself a law of a rather restrictive nature." How do we arrive at a physical law from total disorder or randomness? Davies continues, "Although each individual quantum event may be genuinely unpredictable, a collection of such events conforms with the statistical predictions of quantum mechanics. One might say that there is order in disorder." To put it colloquially, it seems that Davies wants his cake and to eat it too. In other words, he wants a little bit of order and a little bit of disorder in his cosmos. Total order takes us to the cosmos of Christians, Muslims, and Jews. A little bit of disorder takes us to Davies's creative cosmos. Can disorder exist alongside order? Well, on Davies's reading of quantum mechanics, it can. Not only that, the tiny examples of disorder at the level of quantum mechanics can lead to the bigger systems which Davies refers to. One can imagine other related cases too, such as aleatory and stochastic music. Is Davies a pantheist or a panentheist? Some readers may ask if this creative cosmos actually is God. Not in Davies's scheme. That's because Davies has already told us that God doesn't interfere in the evolution of the universe, and he has already told us about God's guiding hand. None of this suggests a literal identity, a la Spinoza, between the creative cosmos and God. The creative cosmos is as separate from God as the deterministic universe is. One may as well throw in the winding up the universe and letting it run idea here. Despite the above, some commentators have labeled Davies's worldview as pantheistic, God as the laws of nature themselves, or panentheistic, which itself apparently aligns to various degrees with texts and positions found in Advaita Vedanta. Conclusion: some readers may not find any of Davies's interpretations and parallels with ancient religious views convincing. Moreover, he could still hold all his physical and cosmological positions without ever bringing them up. Of course, that would leave a lacuna in Davies's eyes. In Davies's own words, theoretical physics became, in a sense, my religious quest, the best hope I had of making sense of the world and my place within it. So a purely scientific account of the cosmos would leave out meaning, purpose, and perhaps, more importantly, an emotionally and intellectually satisfying explanation of the whole shebang.